I'm Phil Ware. I'm glad you joined me for this week's ToGather.church. And this is a week where I hope that you'll click the link that takes you to the full worship, because this is a week of worship, a time where we're full of the fear of the Lord, not a scared fear, but one that's full of humility and reverence and delight, because the holy God has chosen to know us and invite us to know him. As Paul said in Acts 17, he made us so that we would perhaps reach out to him and find him, for he is not far from any of us. For in him we live and move and have our very being. But part of the reason that we're yearning to have a relationship with God is that God is so vast and so much of him is unknowable. And we need to be in touch with someone that is different, that is other, that is greater, that is higher, that is mightier, and yet still loves us even though he knows us. So today, our theme is very simple: the path of the wind. And the path of the wind is really unknowable. Even if we know the major directions of the wind, we have no way to predict which direction it will go in all the little nooks and crannies and valleys and mountaintops, and how that will change with the heating and the cooling of the day, with the downflow of the winds in the evening as they come down from the mountains to the valleys, and as they go up during the day as they heat up and mix with the winds that have all these different directions. We just can't know the paths of the wind. Nor can we know really how God forms a person. We know the process of gestation, from the fertilization of an egg to the birth of a baby, and we have pictures of that from ultrasound. But we really don't know how a person is put together. So today, our focus on the path of the wind is a journey of humility and reverence and delight. And our focus verse is a verse for us that calls us to worship this incredible God. Ecclesiastes 11 and verse 5. And the wise man Koheleth says, "As you do not know the path of the wind, or how the body is formed in a mother's womb, so you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things." Isn't it good that while God was among us and had human flesh like we are in Jesus, that Jesus was Emmanuel, God with us, so that now as he's at the right hand of God, we know he's interceding for us, and we can go to him and receive grace to help in our time of need, because God doesn't just know us as creator and the omnipotent God. He knows us as human beings because he has been one of us. He is able to sympathize with our weakness. Hebrews 2 and Hebrews 4 emphasize that God. But on the other hand, God is unknowable. What we know are just the fringes of his garment. Job said it well when he said, "Yet these are but a small part of his doings, the outskirts of his ways, the mere fringes of his force, the faintest whisper of his voice. Who dares contemplate, or who can understand the thunders of his full magnificent power?" The image here is of the tassels on the bottom of a very devout Jewish man's robe. Jesus would have had these tassels too. And you remember that when the woman with the flow of blood had exhausted all of her money on many doctors, she comes to Jesus. She is a pariah, an outcast. She's not allowed in the synagogue or the marketplace. She's not supposed to touch anyone else, or she will make them unclean. But she hears about Jesus. She knows his compassion. She's heard about his power. She doesn't understand everything about him. She doesn't know he's Son of God, the Christ, the Messiah. She knows all those titles may be associated with him, but she can't understand all that. All she knows is she's got problems. She's got needs. No one can help her. And so she works her way through the crowd and reaches out and touches the tassels on the edge of his garment. That's the image Job has. That's all we can know of God. All we know of his magnificence is just the tassels on the edges of his garments. And yet he bids us come because we know our needs. We know our struggles. We know the things in our life that we can't fix, and others can only be encouraging to us to continue because they can't fix them either. But in the middle of that, we know the outskirts, the tassels of God's ways, and we reach out for that thunderous power in humility and in reverence. And when we make contact with that God, it's delight. It leads us to worship. Yes, these are but a small part of his doings, the outskirts of his ways. But we know we need it, and so we reach out for it. But before we get too brash with our words, we exhaust our minds and then pretend to know more than we are, and we do. We need to remember the other words of Kohelet, Solomon, the wise man. Do not be quick with your mouth. Do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. God is in heaven and you are on earth, so let your words be few. Yes, the woman who needed help from Jesus didn't have a lot of words, did she? And when she touched the hem of his garment, the tassels on his robes, she was healed. She knew it instantly, but she didn't make a big noise or a big fuss. In fact, Jesus had to say, wait a minute, someone has touched me. I felt power go out from me. Some of that thunderous power of the Almighty had come through him and into her and healed her. So she very meekly, reverently falls at his feet and tells him, I'm the one who touched you. And you remember what Jesus does. He doesn't rebuke her. He doesn't humiliate her. He didn't call her forward to shame her. He said, go into a life of shalom, peace, fullness, wholeness, healthiness. Go into that life that God has made for you and delight in his grace. Now, for us to say, I don't know is a hard thing, isn't it? It's hard for us to say, I don't really know about that. Some of us are good to butt in and offer our opinion, whether they're wanted or not. Other times, we pretend like we know some secret thing. In fact, the web and the social media apps out there today all depend upon people wanting to know or share or do something that's unique and special. TikTok exists because of people doing different, crazy, unusual things to demonstrate that they've thought of something or can do something or dumb enough to try something or courageous. I'm not really sure that's the term. Courageous enough to do something really ridiculous. But despite all those creative things that we do, we still have to say, ultimately, there are a lot of things I don't know. I don't understand. I don't have the power to fix, but I know the one who does. He's the one who understands the path of the winds. He's the one that knows how he weaves together a person inside that child's mother's womb, even before she's felt the flutter of existence. And he is putting together that child with a plan and a purpose for that child's life. He knows them at that point, but we don't. And while we may know how the physical form comes together, how does the living soul come alive in that child? And how does that child have certain skill sets? How does the DNA form? Is it just random? Or is God behind that in an answer to prayer? Or maybe it's just strictly his choice to use a person like David or Paul or others that he chose before their conception to be made in such a fashion to do something incredible and creative. Yes, our God is incredible. And just as we do not know the path of the wind or how the body is formed in a mother's womb, we cannot understand the work of God and the maker of all things. We just delight that he longs to know us, and we reach out to touch the tassels at the bottom of his magnificence, and he fills us with his grace and makes us come alive with new hope. That's our God. O Lord, our Lord, your majestic name fills the earth. Your glory is higher than the heavens. When I look at the night sky and see the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars you set in place, what are mere mortals that you should think about them, should think about us, human beings, that you should care for them, that you would care for us. God is mysterious, and parts of him are unknowable because our human brains, no matter how magnificent they are, cannot comprehend all that he is, much less all that he does and why he does it. But we know he does it to bring us to light and bring us into fellowship with him. As you do not know the path of the wind or how the body is formed in a mother's womb, so you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things. You see, we know just a little bit. As Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13, now we know dimly, but one day we will know because we'll see him face to face. In fact, 1 John 3, 1 through 3 says, one of these days we're going to be like him. We'll be able to see him as he is in all his glory, and we'll be part of that glory. But until then, we just have to realize we can't know everything about him, but we can take delight in him as we reverence his greatness and we stand in humility at his magnificent love for us. Yes, we can't know the directions of the wind. We just cannot determine its path. No matter how great the weather forecasting model is, and I'm sure you've seen your weather forecaster say, now the European model, the American model, the Canadian model, this other model, and they're similar, but they're all different. And they know generally where the weather's coming from, and they can predict weather for several days with a reasonable degree of accuracy. You just can't know everything. We have a hard time understanding how a person can come alive inside another person in the womb of his or her mother. But we know, we're told, that it's God whose fingerprints are on that process. He chooses the DNA. He decides the purpose for that person's life. He has a plan for their days, and he knows them individually, even before we know they're there, or a sonogram can detect that little child's presence. So we're left to be humble and to know what we know by grace in Jesus. You see, God in his grace has chosen to reveal himself to us. He is the mystery of mysteries. He is the supreme, knowable, unknown. So what we do know of him is what he's revealed to us in Jesus. And what we know is mighty and awesome. But this mighty and awesome Jesus is loving and merciful, and he cares about you. And he enables us, because he's been here, to reach out and touch the fringe of his garments and know the thundering power of his ways means that because our life is joined to his, our future is secure. So we may not know the path of the wind or how God forms a living being inside another, but we do know this: Jesus loves us. He gave himself for us. He triumphed over death to give us life, and he's coming back to share his glory. And while that's not much more than just the tassels on the fringe of the garment of his greatness, it's enough until we're made like him. and we will see him as he is. Keep that hope alive. Until next week, God bless.